stage Goruko 2012's first speaker, Dr. Nick Williams. Yeah!
Thanks, guys. That was so worth it. Now, I have no idea what I was going to talk about. Oh, no, I have prompts. That's excellent. Good thinking for me. If later on during my talk you start to question where's my extraordinary accent come from, you may have heard it before. It's called intellect. And I also happen to be Australian. I live here on the E3 visa, which is a tremendous visa. I like to call it the war visa because we got this visa from you. It's just for Australians because we went to war with you. Yeah! Oh, no, we're in New York. Sorry, that goes really well in the South. And must remember to cut out some of my slavery slides. And you got to keep it topical. The problem I've got is I've been here a couple of years now. You have to renew it, and it's a website thing. And you guys may have built websites before. The people that built this one for the visa application had never apparently built a website before. It was really, really awful. It was one of the, so I don't know, look, this is not my talk, but I just think it's interesting because we build websites. Who's ever built a website before? For the people who can't see, they all put their hands up and it was awesome. They're all really enjoying my talk. You really should have been here. Sucks to be live. So there was just a little user experience glitch that I was having at one point, which is I'd finished my application. And my application took an hour and a half because they pretty much wanted to know everything about me. First thing, I did this a year and a half ago. I would have thought they would have kept the data because not much has changed. I'm still Australian and I still have the same passport. But no, this is fresh and interesting to them. But they know it takes a long time. They put, it says estimated burden, 75 minutes. It literally says estimated burden. I don't know, that's probably a top tip to fix the fucking site. Anyway, look, the reason I came was, hang on. I cut out the slides. No, wrong one. Sorry. What you're seeing here is professionalism. You have one set of slides for me talking to you, has the fancy animations and the funny jokes, and then another set of slides that you put up on the internet where the jokes don't make any sense. So let's go back to the slides with the funny joke. So the reason I came to Goruko is not, which one are we at? Goruko is, Goruko is, got the right number of syllables. Goruko, wrong number of syllables. It's because of this. This is awesome. Oh, wow. I know that I'm the first speaker. I know that really what we all want to do is get on the boat, so I thought, bugger it, let's just spend the next 10 hours just watching the clock. Anyway, I probably should do a talk. All right, what I wanted to talk about is production systems. When I first came to Engine Yard, I had used Engine Yard, I'd used Heroku, I'd done things ourselves. I'd hired people so I didn't have to do it. That's how you outsource. You recruit people and make them do all the annoying things. But I've been building websites for a decade, and I think deployment is really interesting. I think it's really interesting because we expect a lot from it, all our tools, we expect a lot of outcomes, and I think, and the point of a lot of my talk is that we stop expecting things of tools that don't do them. It's really annoying every day to wake up and be frustrated by tools that don't do what you want. So what you do in a sort of Stockholm Syndrome sort of way is you just start loving your tools, talking about how awesome they are, and just forget about the stuff you can't do. And you'll start sort of saying, no, like I've never wanted to ship my application behind the firewall. That's silly. I hate the enterprise. Where does these sorts of ideas come from? I hate the enterprise come from someone who can't sell to the enterprise. There's just, I won't admit to my failures. I'll just say I hate them and would never want to sell to them. And I think if we sort of take a moment, and pretty much what I want to do is go through some realities and perhaps some big ideas or some big questions of what we would really like to be able to do with our deployment systems, production systems, and therefore perhaps there are some completely new tools that we should be building, as opposed to the ones that are sort of organically grown up. So anyway, if you've never thought about how a web app gets hosted, it's like this. It's beautiful, isn't it? And this is web traffic. It goes up and back down, and out comes the other side on the browser. It's really quite technically involved. You wouldn't understand it. And so this is the interesting part that for most of you it's interesting is you've written your app, and it's very special because you wrote it. And you know every line of code of it, and you've argued about it, you've discussed it, it's the basis of your business, it's very, very important to you. Far more important than any other part of this, surely. So the most interesting thing is to be able to put your new version on your production system. And we have some very elaborate tools, and businesses like Engineer built around this idea of going from one box to another box, because we love that so badly. And so what's perhaps more interesting is to ask the question, so yeah, that's really cool, you can do that once. Or in the whole first month, it's like I can deploy every day, woohoo! But what about the next 59 months? I mean, I just sort of pulled that out of the air one day as sort of describing this problem I sort of noticed was a business might last sort of 5 years, or your website. I mean, it's arbitrary, but you know, therefore, 59 months is 60 minus 1. I started to question, well, how do you know, what tools do we need? What sort of expectations should we have? Why should it be nice and awesome and sexy in the first month and torturous and, you know, annoying and impossible to live with for the next 59? And so I wanted to sort of talk about that and to talk about some ideas of solutions. So there are other things you're going to want to do in the next 59 months. You're going to want to upgrade stuff. I know. As much as MySQL 5.0.51 is the gold standard of SQL, it's possible at some point you might want to upgrade from that to something else. It's possible that you might want to migrate from MySQL to Postgres. I mean, only if you've ever heard about Postgres. If you've never heard about it, you wouldn't want to do that. But once you've heard about it, you know you should migrate to it. Or you might migrate from MongoDB to anything else that actually stores your data. And you know, you pick up these things. But that's the point, right? We know that over time we're going to change our mind, not just about our code, but about some of the underlying things that we picked up. Question. So I had this, there's 300 people in the room. Hands up if you've ever read the source code to MySQL. 3? 4? That's 4 more than I thought. But we use it, but none of us have ever actually looked at the source code. Actually, how many people actually looked at the source code, you know, in some length of Ruby? Sweet. That is awesome. I mean, I feel bad for you because it's a 20-year-old code base that's kind of, you know, shows it. But I think it's really important to recognize that these tools that we use, both production and others, it's important to have read them and looked at them and know that they are part of our universe. All right, the other things we're going to want to change over time is there are going to be kernel patches, new versions of kernels, new operating systems that come out. We are going to want to move to those, and that shouldn't be torturous. It shouldn't be an exceptional request. But for many production systems, that is an exceptional request. We're going to want to scale, we're going to want to move to new hardware, and we're going to want to, you know, perhaps disaster recovery is an example of where we're going to actually move our system to an entirely different set of hardware and networking. And perhaps another one is at some point with success, we're actually going to want to start doing our, you must be really impressed at this point with my tremendous drawing skills. Is we're going to want to start, you know, read one of those Steve Yegge blog posts where we talk about how awesome service-oriented architectures are. Someone in your organization is going to think, I should make a little Sinatra app. And all of a sudden you've got complexity coming out your butthole. And keeping track of all this and you know, the distributed system you've now got, I don't think many of us will have done it before. And the first time we do it, it's going to be quite painful. And our production system, I think, and our tools should help, not get in our way. So one of the things that's interesting where this sort of became a problem is that each of these different boxes has historically been sort of the domain of different people. Ergo, different teams, both either explicit people in your organization, implicit people perhaps at a hosting provider. Either way, they've had different motivations, different policies, different reasons for doing what they want. I mean, just a quick example is if you're deploying your app, you're an agile team, you want to do continuous delivery, continuous deployment, you want app deployment to be really fast. When you come from more of a sysadmin IT background, you want it to be solid and stable. And those two things are different. And my hypothesis, as we sort of go through this, is that just because there's two different teams wanting two different things, doesn't mean you can't have one system that sort of does it, but just with different user experiences. It is going to require probably an entirely different platform to do that, but I do have at least an idea of the existing product that might be able to help, or an open source tool. So it'll be interesting if you sort of come along with this journey with me for the next 30 minutes and you sort of start thinking, yeah, I kind of get that. Then there is a solution at the end, which I think it's interesting. So the other thing that's sort of happened in the last 6 years, a proliferation of interesting DevOps tools and production tools that didn't exist 6 years ago. And I guess one example of just, when I joined Engine Yard, I became interested in Engine Yard history because, I don't know, I just discovered something. I was sort of asked, how did this feature get implemented? And every story would go through a sequence of things and end with, well, Ezra did that on a weekend. So it's interesting. And one of those examples is the reason we use Gentoo. Has anyone ever used Gentoo before? It's a source-based packaging system. It allows you to describe explicitly exactly what you want, allows you to patch source. There's a lot of wonderful attributes to it. Tooling is not one of its wonderful attributes. But the reason we picked Gentoo was 6 years ago, when we wanted to start carving up real machines using Zen. It was the only packaging sort of kernel system that would allow us to actually use Zen with 64-bit or something like that on the particular architecture. Now we use it 6 years later. Little decisions like that can really affect you, and if you don't have automation to allow you to change your mind, you're going to be stuck with these decisions. And you don't even know why you're making some of these decisions. In those boxes, you're just going to pick you're just going to take whatever's available because you're in a hurry. But you don't want to be stuck with them, especially if you pick Mongo. And so here's an example of just sort of putting some ideas, or just if you haven't sort of mapped this to your head. Interesting new book came out, Deploying Rails. They are a proponent of Puppet and Capistrano for deployment. They don't mention any of the things at the bottom. I just sort of wanted to at least promote their book because I think it's an interesting book. But there's new ways of doing virtualization with Zen, CloudStack, or OpenStack, or if you want to go and give VMware lots of money, you could go and get one of those sort of vSphere type products. Razor, an interesting new product that came out for discovering new hardware that turns up and then allowing it to become part of a universe completely automatically. So if you've ever taken bare metal and tried to provision and turn it into something, it must be a complete godsend. Could you all please turn your phones off? Or at least down. What else we got? If you're cloud, these are some of the choices that either have been made for you implicitly or the tools at the top that you're going to use. So EY Deploy for deployment, you're going to use Chef if you want to do modifications. If you're on Heroku, your interfaces are different again, and some of the choices have been different that you've been either made for you. And I guess how am I trying to... I'm trying to say that not only is the tools different, and we'll get to what some of these things don't allow us to do with these different tools, is that the mental models that the people went through when they were building the tools are different. And the way they store data is different. And it's not really possible to aggregate all together and get some of these requirements that we have. So here's an example of two different types of upgrades. And I've given them different words, but later I'm going to sort of request that you all just call them deployment. Any change to production system is a deployment. It is kind of an overriding theme of my thinking at the moment. So, but for the sake of everyone here, we're going to say there's code upgrades and service upgrades, or code deployments and sort of packaging deployments changes. But you can sort of see how it's different. The way we did Capistrano was that we had a releases folder, and this is how we do EY Cloud as well. You have a releases folder, a timestamp, you put the code in there, and then a current folder, as current symlink points to one of them. That seems really clever. It allows you to have separation. You can have both versions running if you sort of have a rolling migration or a rolling upgrade. You can do a rollback if you want to. You can at least have a history of what was there. So why don't we do it for everything else? Why is it that when we install a new version of Nginx, it might just completely override the previous one? So I'm not saying one's versus, yes, in this case I'm saying one is better than the other, but they're just different. And different mental approaches have been brought to all these different tools. And at this point, you're probably wondering, great, this is fascinating, Nick. Great way to start the morning. You're making my brain hurt. Awesome. Really appreciating it. Let's go back to the boat jokes. But here's what's interesting, is whichever tools you're using have affected your thinking. And you have to not necessarily, the tools are there to empower us. They're there to make us do more and be stronger and get more done without thinking. But we need to keep keeping track of what we actually want to be able to do, because sometimes our tools in their optimizations stop us from doing something that we might want to do. And so what I want to sort of put to you is some big questions about how we want to live with our production systems. And it's implicit that a lot of the tools that we have don't solve those big questions. I'm not going to demonstrate that to you. I just want to sort of move on with these questions and sort of discuss what I think are requirements for a solution, and point to this project I discovered recently that I think is an interesting starting point for this sort of question. So let's go through some big questions that I think we should be asking of our production system. And this is tough for me to do this, because as someone who works at Nginx, surely what I should be doing at the end is saying, and the solution is Nginx. Or I should shut up. Perhaps I shouldn't talk about this. Perhaps I shouldn't talk about anything until Nginx has a solution. But there's a dialogue. What I think and what Nginx thinks production is in part a reflection of what you all want. And we can't build a product for what we think you should want unless first I have a conversation with you about where I think deployment should go, in part. So a lot of this is just, let's all just rethink, because a lot of the ideas are just, we haven't even had a conversation about. They're just sort of tools that turned up and go, that's awesome. And it's got a conference that goes with it. Yay, chef. And then you find out it's not awesome. And then what are you going to do? Hire, puppet people? I mean, these aren't solutions, they're tools. All right, so remember, this is the problem space. Month one has kind of been taken care of by all the tools, but we want to start thinking about the next 59 months. It's not just about getting our system up once, it's about living with it and other things we might want from our production system or the entire deployment universe. So here's an example. What I'd like to be able to do is to test changes to any part of my configuration or stack, networking, OS, kernels, etc., and obviously code. And when I'm happy with it, deploy that. It's not just about code change, it's any part of this I want to be able to say, okay, great, there's a certain version in production, here is the new version, and I want to be able to deploy that. I want to be able to A/B test or have sort of different versions of simultaneous versions of things running. So I can start to, an example is slightly changing some of your Nginx configuration just to see if it gives you better performance, whether it gives you a different outcome for your customers. And it shouldn't just be your code. I want my system to be able to do that. When new people come on, how quickly can they take production and have their own version of it with their own working branch? Bootstrapping new developers, how fast they can start to, working and going to production can really change their attitude to what it's like to work at your environment. So why shouldn't we have tools to make that better? Another good one is, how quickly can I diagnose what the hell just happened? And not just what just happened, because sometimes that's actually a lot easier. It might be 3 days ago, you finally get to a certain error, and well, what did production look like 3 days ago? Who had just done something in production? Why did they do it? Is any of this being logged, tracked? Can I reproduce it? Can I bring back up to go back to this one? Can I bring back up a historical version of our environment to try and reproduce this bug? You might say, well, I don't need to do that. I think you do. I think you get through diagnostics, and as systems get more and more complex, especially when you start doing service-oriented architectures, figuring out where something went wrong gets really, really hard. And able to reproduce things safely outside of production can really speed you up. And this is a little interesting one that's in the top of my head at the moment, is why is it that we don't demand that we should be able to take our production system, not our app, but our entire system, and be able to put it behind the firewall? I know there's plenty of enterprises who have very good, solid corporate IT policies that say things like, it's my data, not yours. I mean, Gmail is so awesome that I'm prepared for all my corporate data at Engine Yard to be on Google servers. But I don't really want to. I'd much rather have a version of Gmail that's mine running in my data center. Not necessarily my data center. It could still be running on Amazon Cloud or one of the other clouds, but it's my data, not Google's. And people want this. And the reason we don't do it, now I could say no one does it, we shouldn't do it, but GitHub's trying to do it. Now, when I say trying, they, I believe their headcount recently just hit 91. They have 10 people, 10, who take head of GitHub, like the master branch head, that, and package it up. 10 people. I mean, how big does your business have to be to do that? And I think that's unfair. I think it should be far simpler. I think there's a part of me, and this is, I'd love if anyone thinks this is interesting, have this conversation on the boat, is wouldn't it be wonderful as part of your business model, you knew you were going to be able to package up your app, your entire system, and offer it behind the firewall if people wanted it. Perhaps the public version is just a demonstration for the intent of getting enterprise customers. But since we don't really have tools for it, we don't think about it, and tools affect our thinking, and therefore we don't go about building businesses with that model, and therefore enterprise and us don't get to talk to each other. And I think that's sad. And the reason is our tools don't let us. So I have these big questions, and it's hard having questions like this in your head if you don't have a solution. So I'll admit, some of the solutions sort of came about because I found something. And I didn't build it. So it's a bit sucky. It's much more fun to talk about something you built. It's like, look, how clever I am. But I'd much rather find something and try and explain why I think it's powerful and for you to investigate further. And so what this is so I'm going to sort of go through from a high level what I think it should do, this system. So here's a couple of things. I think your production system should have explicit descriptions of everything that's going on. Now, that does not mean that that's your user interface. Right? You can still wrap everything that's here as a requirement in a nice cap deploy type thing or a command line that says, take this thing and do a release. But what I want is a complete description of what just happened. All the source files. There's no reason, there's no reason not to just take snapshots of all raw source. The last thing you want is for it to disappear. And as much as I love GitHub or SourceForge or whatever, SourceForge will one day go away because it'll go broke. And as RubyForge may go away one day, and one day GitHub will go away. And I would rather have a historical log of everything exactly what it was. And that's a big thing to ask, but it's not if it was easy. I want everything to be upgradable. So we went through those pictures. I want all those boxes to change. And obviously, I kept that picture really simple. There's a lot of complexity in that. And ultimately it comes down to everything changed in history, and then there's this sort of the bottom part is trying to free people from how complex or awful this might be, and say it's in my mind that it should still be simple to use for the different people that are coming into the system, doing their different things. So essentially I want to be able to do complete system deployments, not just deploy an app. I want to be able to build up an entire universe from scratch. And I want to be able to come back and be able to rebuild that 3 years from now. Because we've all got apps that just sit on the internet, and one day they demand our attention. It's like, I don't know how this works anymore. You've changed your public keys. You can't even log into it anymore. It's torturous. You should have written better documentation. When we get going fast, we don't think about these things, and our tools should allow us to not have to think about it. We should be able to go back and rebuild things from scratch, go back and fix some of these issues. All right, a couple of nice to haves. I think you'll get a lot more benefit. Your ability to upgrade is going to be made more easy if you don't just have one Ruby installed. Because if, for example, your app code might be using Ruby 193, patch, whatever it is that's out now, and then some of your system monitoring tools like God might be using it. Well, now you've got a problem. Ruby 194 comes out, and you want to upgrade. So what have we got to go through? Every one of our different things throughout the entire stack that's using that one Ruby. So I think what we really want to be doing is having separate dependencies installed for the particular thing that was using it. So you want your app Ruby, your God Ruby. You don't want to do that yourself, you just want that to have happened. You just want it to be simple so that you can make sure that its upgrades are easy and possible. Isolation for things that are happening so that you can look at them and control them, fix them. And then with that sort of portable deployment idea. I think it should be possible. I think it should be doable. I think you shouldn't have to have 10 people working for you to be able to sell to enterprise. All right, so just to take a picture, look, it would be awesome if I could draw an arrow across the entire thing and go, look, there's one tool for everything. I'm not sure whether that's actually a good idea or not. But certainly, I think the solution, I think what we all need is a system that sort of captures the top 3.5, including provisioning of VMs. You know, and probably managing networking, but the diagram gets a little screwy at that point. And so let's go through sort of some of the ideas or the requirements as we go, sort of more granular detail. All right. So we mentioned before, I want all our source code for everything. I'm not saying we'll get to packaging in a second. Packaging is a point in the sort of delivery system, not like how do I put this? That there is an Ubuntu or Debian package for Ruby doesn't make it good. In fact, that's a wonderful example of a package that's not good. You should, I hate the word should. I demand that you build your own packages, okay? I demand you build them from your own source. I demand that your app code gets turned into a package. Why? Just so it's all the same. Why should there be one concept for deploying source code for your very special app that you love and it's all very wonderful and special, but a different way of packaging and shipping everything else? Only bad things can happen. Or just not bad. It just gets mangled and difficult, and you've got 2 code paths for doing automation. And there's really nothing that special about your Ruby code. I know we're at Ruby conference, and we're going to spend the rest of the day talking about how wonderful Ruby is. But it's just a process running. Another process that might be running could be Java. But Linux doesn't care. Trust me, Linus doesn't care about your Ruby code. So I want to package everything, you could use Debian. There is a tool called Brew2Deb that allows you to take anything, including Ruby gems, code in a folder, other packages, and turn them into Debian packages. And that's what I believe the GitHub people are using as sort of their packaging concept. So it means you can turn everything. And so instead of having a bundle install that happens at deployment time, you would pre-package everything into Debian packages and deploy them that way. Not the Debian way, your fucking way. It's your system. Just, they're tools that we're going to use or an idea in our head of how we want things to happen. At some point, installing things from source on your production servers is going to get monotonous and slow, and you're probably going to want sort of binary store of everything. Just compile things once. But you compiled them on your system, so you know exactly where everything is. You've got absolute paths to everything. So you kind of, you can statically bind things without having to have, dynamic and it's your system, you built it. Doesn't mean it can't be easy. I'm trying to describe here a powerful model, but I want you to trust that there could be a simple user experience for it. Because we would demand that. We want power and simplicity of the experience. But eventually you're going to want a binary store of everything so that you can build your systems, you boot VMs quickly, just throw them away quickly. And I think keeping track of a system history is super important for diagnostics, for being able to reproduce things, and ultimately your ability to, especially when we start shipping systems off into 1,000 different enterprises, then we're going to want to know what happened, because they're on different versions. All these things we would hate to have to think about. But if we demand it, and then we think, right, I must be able to ship behind the firewall, then you're going to want this. The ability to know exactly, just treat, and it's kind of an interesting idea to treat scaling as just another attribute of, like how many VMs you have for your app tier is just another attribute of what version of Ruby you're using. So just keep track of all this information, and you should be able to reconstruct what actually happened in your system. And then we sort of went through before this, I mentioned orchestrated upgrades, and I've got an interesting sort of demo of what I mean by that. But the ability to do everything, independent of what it was, and portable deployments. So just a quick idea of sort of a visualization of an example. And this is in part just me demonstrating how wonderful I am with Keynote. So get ready for Keynote awesomeness. But first, we need a key. You're going to see this box a lot in the next few minutes. And this box just represents everything. It's much simpler. So whenever you see this box, it's something is inside, and it's sort of some version of something. Whether it's a package, whether it's a process, it doesn't, or it doesn't really matter. Okay, so we want orchestrated changes. We want to say, okay, there's 2 of something, and we want to go to 4. We want to be able to sort of take that there are 4 and upgrade them. And the visualization I just did there is I think, an important one. The ability of you don't want to just throw away 4 good instances or 4 good things and upgrade them. It might not work. Bad things happen. So doing 1 and finding out whether it was successful and then doing the rest is a pretty good algorithm for making sure that your system ended up in the state you wanted it to. Because we are transforming your system, your precious production system, upon which your boss, loves very dearly, and he's not going to like it if you took it down. We want to add more VMs, again in batches. We want to do, and just this idea of doing everything in small batches, just to make sure, in part because there's constraints, but also because your system's under load constantly, so you don't want to sort of take your whole system down every time you want to be able to do upgrades. You want to be able to do continuous delivery of not just your code, but all your system changes. So it would suck, I think, if I talked about this and that I didn't have a solution at all. That'd be a sucky way to start the day. This may already be a sucky way to start the day, I don't know. I can't go back to the timer because that was just Keynote animation. It would start at 10 hours again, and that would suck. So, this idea does exist. But firstly, you could go and build it yourself. So I went to ChefConf. I went to ChefConf because A, it was near San Francisco. Actually, literally, I thought it was in San Francisco. So I traveled an hour to San Francisco and then found out it was back down near where I used to live. So that was annoying. But nonetheless, I went to ChefConf because it was a DevOps conference, and I thought, this is going to be awesome. People are going to talk about DevOps. It's going to be great. Couldn't believe it. They just talked about Chef all day. Everything had Chef in it. Oh, look how I solved this problem. Oh, I use Chef, and it's wonderful. No, Chef isn't wonderful. It's good. We use it. It's got a lot of attributes to it. I think I made a smart remark on Twitter. It was like, ChefConf is all about how I fixed everything else around Chef. I use Chef. It doesn't do everything, because nothing does. So I had to do all this. And here's an interesting example which you're not supposed to be able to read. You should be able to read it, can't you? Anyone can't read it? It's the idea of a continuous deployment system that goes from code development, and not just of your code, but all your different system levels. Sort of distinct. He's got a 2-level one, whereas I had like 7 levels. But it goes through. It's got a packaging system, and you should be able to find this URL if you just sort of look for ChefConf, and I don't know. I can't remember how I found it. These slides will be up on Speaker Deck later on, and you'll be able to just get this idea of what they built to try and get this same homogeneous delivery of any part of any change. So if you've got a big team, you might like to do it yourself. I wouldn't, it's tough. ChefConf was just example after example of large organization who went and built a system like this. So the other thing is a thing called BOSH. And BOSH was created by the group that's building Cloud Foundry. And again, tough for me to talk about, because certain pundits would say Cloud Foundry is a competitor to Engine Yard. So what the hell am I standing up talking about their open source? Well, that's why I'm doing it in New York, where no one can stop me. Because I think it's really good. I think it's really interesting. Whether BOSH is ultimately the solution or not isn't as important so much as the ideas that it had in it. And I couldn't have even had a lot of these ideas if I hadn't played with BOSH and started asking questions. They were very, very generous of their time And they had good answers. I'd ask them, why did you do this? And they'd give me some answer that came from, well, when we were at Google and we did this, this, and this. And I go, oh, okay. I must admit, every time they said, because when we were at Google, you stopped listening. You just assume they had good answers. So the guys that built Bosch, they worked at a place where they had the Borg. Now, the Borg is the current sort of infrastructure platform that every app at Google runs on. It either runs on Borg or one level above, and they run it on App Engine. So they've used this, and they had experiences with it. And they wanted to build a system that could ship Cloud Foundry. Now, I don't care so much for Cloud Foundry, somewhat being a competitor, and it not working. Yet, it's still being built. Sorry, I'm not really that disrespectful. It's just funny jokes. But Cloud Foundry doesn't provision infrastructure, is sort of where I draw the line at it being interesting. Cloud Foundry, like Red Hat's OpenShift, isn't like sort of Heroku or Engine Yard in that they just run processes. They run your processes. They can't provision infrastructure. And the way that Cloud Foundry is given infrastructure to run your processes on is with Bosch. The way they recommend that you actually install and manage Cloud Foundry is with Bosch. Cloud Foundry is really complex. Like, it's got 40 different moving parts. So if Bosch can deal with that, it could probably deal with your 3-tier Ruby app. Now, it might start with 3 parts, but it's going to go to 4, it's going to go to 5, it's going to go to 40. Every app just gets more complex. So why not start with a platform idea or a concept that's going to allow you to go there without everyone taking 3 weeks off? Right, let's fix our deployment systems. So for the last few months, when Bosch came out, I got really interested in it. Well, I didn't get really interested. I was interested in some of the problems they had solved. So I played with it, and then I got more interested. And then I wrote some documentation for it. And then I wrote a tutorial, and then I did some talks about it. So you would think I built it. I think I'm far more public about Bosch than even the Bosch team are. Certainly my slides are a lot prettier than theirs. So if you go to some of these URLs, you'll find more information about Bosch, a couple of videos. And I didn't really want to go through and do all that again. I'd rather just have a conversation around deployment and what I think is going to be important in the future. Because, as I said, I'm really prejudiced. I think this is an interesting problem to solve. If it existed, I could think of dozens of little businesses or products or services that I would build or would try and find that existed and try and package them up and sell them. Because we, who are building the most awesome services the world's ever seen, don't have a way to sell to people who aren't allowed to buy from us. And I think it's really interesting. So I just want to finish with this idea that regardless of deployment, regardless of whatever you're doing, just be aware that the tools that you know and love are both empowering you to be more effective and to take off some of the workload, but are also restricting probably how you think about things. And you may even have negative thoughts about alternative things you might like to do, like sell to the enterprise. I don't want to sell to the enterprise. You do, you just don't know how. I don't want split windows. You can, just use something else except TextMate. I guess the answer is Sublime Text now, or Vim, or whatever. But I still like TextMate. I don't know, I just can't stop using it. I don't need split windows. Ha! See, it comes out of me as well. So you constantly be aware of what tools you're using and ask the question, well, what else could I do? You're coders, you're developers, you could build your own tools. Tool development is, I think, the most pure of our profession. I say pure because in building a tool, you're not doing any actual real work. So it sounds good. I love building tools. I think about tools a lot, and I'm very aware of the downside of every tool. Not necessarily what the downside is, I'm aware that it comes with one. And so hopefully the ideas around deployment have been interesting, but as you go out and build tools, constantly keep thinking about what else other tools you're building, and hopefully, I really hope that the rest of this conference is fantastic, because I can't leave. Because I don't know where the boat is and I have to follow everyone. So thank you very much.